Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar on deploying Azure infrastructure using HashiCorp Terraform, presented jointly by AHEAD and HashiCorp. Today we're joined by AHEAD Solutions Principal Nick Colyer and Senior Solutions Engineer Adam Cavaliere of HashiCorp. These gentlemen will describe how you can get started automating Microsoft Azure in the enterprise with Terraform. They'll walk you through the basics, benefits, and use cases and discuss the most important features of HashiCorp's popular infrastructure as code approach. Before I turn things over to these two guys, a couple of logistical reminders. We do want to hear your questions, but we'll do Q&A at the end of the session. So if you have a question throughout, submit them using the appropriate tab on your BrightTalk page. And also, we'll be posting a few poll questions throughout today's session. We'd greatly appreciate it if you would chime in with some answers to those questions as they appear, okay? So without further delay, let me turn things over to Nick and Adam. Guys, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and thanks everyone for joining. And just a little bit about us, real quickly, so you know that we're knowledgeable enough to tell you all about the things we're going to cover today. So my name is Nick Colyer, as Tom mentioned. I'm a Solutions Principal at AHEAD, and basically the practice lead for Cloud and DevOps, where I also lead a lot about Azure innovation. And for the last 10 years, I've really been heavy in automation, and I'm definitely lucky to be joined by my friend and colleague.
And hi, everybody. Adam Cavaliere here. And really, I got to meet Nick back when we were both on the customer side. And my background really is been in the enterprise architecture space and a deep amount of infrastructure space as well. And that's why the passion around this tool set. So.
Yeah, and so we're excited to get going for you here. And here's the agenda of what we're going to cover very quickly. We will begin with just why Terraform, why Azure, where does this fit in the AHEAD, enterprise cloud delivery framework. A lot of our customers are enterprise customers, and they want to know how this fits into the realm of things that we're doing. Then we will move on to a brief introduction to Terraform constructs that will set you up with the knowledge you need to really understand the demos that we're going to go through. So first demo we will go through is deploying a basic resource group all the way up to deploying a 2-tier app in Microsoft Azure. And then we'll turn it over to Adam to really walk through, okay, it's great that we know how to deploy something in Azure, but how do we truly manage this at enterprise scale, and where the Terraform workspaces come into that. So to begin with, let's start with why Terraform, and we'll start with our AHEAD Enterprise Cloud Delivery Framework. And this is a blueprint that we work with when we work with all of our customers across cloud, whether that's from on-premises to Azure, where does DevOps fit in, et cetera. And there's 6 main areas to this that you can see. So we've got cloud management on the top left, DevOps, which you're not going to cover a lot of today. You'll see how this integrates with DevOps as part of some of the demos we show you, but that's more for a future discussion. Security and risk. And then the main area you see in the middle, all the way from data center to public cloud, we've just seen massive, explosive growth in Azure over the past 6 to 12 months in particular. And so we really thought we would focus this webinar on how you can deploy Azure infrastructure using Terraform. The key for all of this for us is this enterprise enablement layer that you see on the bottom. And this is where we found, HashiCorp's products, specifically around Terraform today, fit in really, really well on our automation and orchestration layer and our extensibility and APIs layer. And so we did want to just launch a quick poll to everyone here. Let me get the vote screen here. I just want to get what is your experience level with Terraform? So hopefully if the BrightTalk system works as planned, you should be seeing a poll on your screen now, and we'll leave that open for 30 seconds or so here while you guys can vote on that. So definitely curious to know what your knowledge is. I've not seen anything coming. We'll come back to that in a moment. But to kind of kick things off and get into the meat of things, this sort of helps to think about what's the old way to get an IT service, right? So this is still a problem. This slide, we've been using for the past 4 or 5 years with all of our automation products. And, you kind of look at it, you think from a developer, they fill out a form and, they go into some ServiceNow ticketing system, whatever. And then, you just send this form around between teams, right? It goes to the server team, they do some work, the monitoring team, backup team, security, et cetera, until the developer gets back, what they need. And so we really wanted to focus a lot of our solutions around how do we actually, solve this problem. And the poll did just come back in, and everyone is kind of in the somewhat experienced category. So that's perfect for what we want to show you today. If we keep going forward, Really what we're going to look at today is, when we think of Terraform and we think of the way you may have deployed infrastructure automatically in Azure already, you're probably using more of a procedural, series of steps type approach. So say you're using PowerShell or the Azure CLI, you typically say, if I want to build, a virtual machine and maybe a SQL server, I'm going to do things like connect to Azure first of all. Then I go and I write the PowerShell command for creating my network. Then I create my subnet. And you kind of get the idea. It's like, do this, then do that, until you end up with your infrastructure. As opposed to, what you've probably seen the tools like Puppet and Chef, which we will come back to later on how they fit into this. But we want to move to this more declarative, define end state type methodology. Whereas instead of me outlining all the steps to get somewhere, I just want to say, give me a stack that includes this app VM, this database VM, a network with the subnet configuration I want, the various set of credentials I want. And that's at the heart of what we're trying to get to here.
And I'd have to say that one of the important things to think about here, whether it's that manual process of submitting tickets back and forth, or even this procedural, is that when you take that approach, you now have the opportunity to change things along the way just slightly. And whether it's you're doing it manually, that's a lot of snowflakes, or you're doing it automatically, where then you have these different sets of unique builds out there, it becomes very hard to manage versus having this declarative approach where you're really saying what you want and not worrying about little changes happening throughout the actual process itself.
Yeah, and if you look at it from this point of view, we'll show you examples for both. Here's the procedural example, right? I want a SQL server, so I put in this form, and even now I'm going to do it automatically. So I've done the first step. I've replaced kind of that human transfer of work, but now I've built the script or PowerShell, whatever it is. It sort of has to go out and talk to all of these systems one at a time, to get what I want. And different teams might be responsible for different standards for each of those various pieces. I still might get a declarative piece because at the end of this infrastructure automation, I might still hand over to a Puppet or a Chef for configuration management. I might assign a role like SQL Server and say, hey, Puppet, Chef, take this VM and turn it into a SQL Server. That part is declarative, but the part before isn't, which leads us on to, really where this comes into play.
And so the Terraform approach, and really this infrastructure as code approach to infrastructure as service, is really the idea of declaring what resources you want to utilize. And if you're familiar with Terraform, you'd know that this resource is then going to have a lot of other things that are specified with it. But at a general level, when we think of this, we're defining the fact that we want a SQL server, we want some monitoring. There's a service registry where the very traditional way of registering a server is going into a CMDB. As we move on to this approach of infrastructure as code and these dynamic services, we need something like a service registry that also allows us to have a much more dynamic approach. And so we're registering into Console, which is actually another tool that HashiCorp has that allows for a much more rich way of looking up your services. And then finally, we're saying that we need some ADA credentials assigned to this. And so this approach here is going to kick off, if we want to just spin it up right away, we're going to do a Terraform apply. We'll get into what a Terraform plan looks like as well. But just as an example here, we kick off this Terraform apply, and instead of you having to think through all of the different dependencies and what the process is, Terraform understands what those dependencies are and will order them appropriately. So here we can see as an example, we're going to create a server first, and then after that, in parallel, we could actually kick off all three of these processes where we're going to create the monitoring rule, the service registry entry, and applying that AD admin to that SQL server. And so this makes your life a lot easier when you have to go and actually set up what you want. You don't have to worry about thinking through all the dependencies. Terraform takes care of that for you. And the final part of this is that it's going to save all of this into a state file. And this is important because day two operations rely on the environment being a very specific way. If your automation is referring to an environment that was defined differently and then changed, and your automation isn't aware of that, it becomes very hard for it to actually effectively make those changes for those day two operations.
Yeah, if you just think back to the previous example, again, if we just go this procedural approach, it's just do this, then that. It's just instructions. There's no state management. I don't think we can reinforce that fact enough. Like that's one of the key things, yeah.
Exactly. And so we're going to talk more about state as we keep going through this presentation, but keep in mind that the state file is a key part to Terraform. And so as we talk through this, let's talk about what a day 2 operation looks like. We still have those resources defined, but at this point we've realized that we want to change something with the monitoring, and we specifically just want to change a part of the way that the SQL Server is being monitored. And so we go and modify that particular part of the configuration. And what we're going to do is, after we've updated the code, is we're going to do a Terraform plan and then an apply. And the idea here is that Terraform references the state, and it looks at how everything's deployed. And it will also even go out to the provider itself and check to make sure everything's the way that it's expected to be. And so it's going to do a verify against that. At this point, it's going to come back and it's going to tell us what needs to happen. And because it knows how the environment was actually set up and what needs to change, it's going to let us know that, hey, everything's good with your SQL Server, the service registry, and the AD credentials. We just need to update the monitoring itself. And at that point, we can kick off the apply and update specifically that setting.
Yeah, and so to follow on, before we kind of get into how to build out the resources, we do want to just kind of establish this baseline of where this fits compared to configuration management. And we'll also open up another poll here right now to start voting on, whether it's, Puppet, Chef, Ansible, should be SCCM, in the fourth option you're seeing on the poll there. But let us know what system you currently use for configuration management, or if you perhaps don't use one at all. Definitely curious to know. But as you vote in, if you look at the slides here, what we're looking at is Terraform really takes care of infrastructure automation. Again, that could be on premises or in Azure, as you'll find out more and more in a minute, can kind of replace ARM and can kind of just build out the network and everything else we want from an infrastructure standpoint. And then Puppet or Chef will take over from the OS configuration point of view. So think about it again. So on the left-hand side, Terraform takes care of VMs, cloud provisioning. That could be PaaS services, that could be IaaS services. And then you hand over to Puppet or Chef or one of the other tools to do your application installation, to maybe configure your OSs a certain way. The great thing, as you can see, is both of these tool suites are declarative. So Terraform now is declarative, just like configuration management tools. But you will find you will have limited mileage if you try to use them in the other areas. So Puppet or Chef isn't going to work well for infrastructure automation. Terraform's not going to work well for managing the state and configuration of an operating system. So important to kind of just understand that difference. And if we look at the votes, actually it's pretty interesting. Definitely a Puppet Chef result here, 50-50 there, and then a lot of people still have no configuration management tools. Hopefully this is pretty beneficial to a lot of you there. So that's kind of the background, and kind of the system as a whole. But why Terraform, versus ARM templates? Why wouldn't I just go ahead and use Azure ARM as we get into the Azure demos here? Well, the first thing, obviously, it's multi-cloud. That's one of the big factors. You still probably have a lot of VMware to manage on premises. Maybe you want to do some automation there, and you don't want to set up another engine like vRealize Orchestrator, something like that. And in particular, one language to rule them all. What you'll find as you see the demos coming up is that the language is much easier to understand and deploy. And then if you decide to onboard maybe AWS or Google as well, you don't have to learn another language. You can learn something, right from the get-go for Azure at this point.
And then, along with that, just to key off on that one piece of the language, it's actually a configuration language as well. So it's not really meant to be, a heavy lifting programming language. It has some mechanisms in there for you to have some logic built in, but the idea is to make it very easily consumable. And then along with that, the idea really here is that we want you to focus on workflows and not really specific technology. So you don't have to get, very much certified on how to use ARM and how to use CloudFormations. It's an easy, consumable language that allows you to use the specific resources in each one of those cloud providers. It doesn't boil them down into something that takes away from you being able to use those resources.
Yeah, and then some of the other key benefits, we've already talked about state management, which we'll keep coming back to, but this concept of enterprise team sharing of code and, trying to minimize infrastructure as code sprawl But to bring this home just to Azure, this has got full Microsoft support. And again, I can't state enough how much Azure has grown for us, and the fact that Microsoft actually build in Terraform providers means you're not in a case which we've had with a lot of other tools in the past, where it's a case of Microsoft releases a new service and now you've got to wait 6 months for Terraform to catch up, or other tool to catch up. Terraform, you don't have that problem. It's a first-class citizen in the Azure world. And so that's the background. Let's move into more of the Terraform constructs that we can set up here. And you saw this in one of Adam's slides earlier on, when we were kind of showing you how we declare. The concept when you want to declare a resource in Terraform is you have your component, which we declare first of all, which is a type resource here, and then we have our provider. So when we want to provision from Azure, we use the Azure RM provider. So, if everyone's not aware, the Azure moved from the classic model to the ARM model a few years ago, and so that's why we use Azure RM there instead of the classic model that used to appear. And then you choose the type of object you want to provision. So it could be a subnet, could be a network, in this case, a resource group, and then you give it a name, and this is the name that it will be referred to throughout your Terraform code. That's not the name of the actual object, which you'll see in the demo shortly. And then from an execution standpoint, there's 3 major things you need to be aware of. One is plan. So again, you can write your code, and then you can type Terraform plan, and that will tell you the changes that are going to take effect if you decide to move on to the next phase, which is to execute that plan. And you do that using the command Terraform apply. And then when you decide, okay, I'm ready to just destroy everything at the end, you can do a Terraform destroy. And this is great because it just destroys the, it's great, obviously if you know that you're supposed to be destroying what it is, but it's great from an ease of use because you can just destroy the entire stack, instantaneously across resource groups, across providers, from whatever is involved in that stack for you. And so with that, we'll jump into the first of the demos here and just kind of show you how we build up to a 2-tier stack for this. So I'm going to hit the screen share here. Hopefully that is sharing. Let me check here. 1 second. And it says give us a few seconds. There we go. We're sharing, yep. Okay, so we're going to head over to Visual Studio Code first of all and show you how this works out. And so the very first thing you can see, I've got a folder on my computer just called RG, so for resource group, which is the very first demo we're going to go into. And I'm in this file called main.tf. All of the Terraform files have the extension TF on the end of them. The first thing I have is a provider at the top. That actually, I've minimized this because it contains all of our secret credentials and things, and this isn't the way you would actually want to do this. You're going to see how we would utilize credentials later on when we get into workspaces. But first of all, to declare a resource and deploy it, first, I just have this resource. I'm using the Azure RM resource group, and then I've decided this is going to be called webinar temp. That's just the HashiCorp name in Terraform for it. But the name it's actually going to deploy in Azure is Terraform webinar, and it's going to put this in location East US. And somebody might be asking, well, why do I need a location for a resource group? That's just where the metadata for the resource group goes in. You can still deploy objects in the resource group in Azure that are in all different regions. And then the final thing we've added here, just to show you that we can tag it. We've added a tag called environment equals ahead Terraform webinar. A lot of people tag the objects. You're allowed 15 tags in Azure, and those might be your business units, cost centers, etc., that you might want to include. So with that, I'm going to drop down to the terminal at the bottom here, and this is just a command prompt that you would see. It runs just like any other, and this is where I can just move this up a little bit more so we can see. There we go. So I'm going to do a Terraform plan first of all. And you can see it'll come up and tell me what it's going to do. So I can scroll up here slowly, and you can see Terraform will perform the following actions, and it's going to add this resource group webinar temp with name Terraform webinar and the tag ahead Terraform webinar. So the next thing I just need to do is do the Terraform apply. Hit enter. It'll prompt me to confirm. I could do a -force if I wanted to, but I'll say yes to confirm that. And that's going to go ahead, and in fact it's already provisioned that. You can see the apply is complete. So if we go over to Azure, we should see a resource group called Terraform webinar to begin with. So let's head over here, refresh our resource groups, and there we can see it, Terraform webinar. If I click into that one and click into tags, we can see we have that tag as well. So this is just a simple resource group in Microsoft Azure. So let's go, that's not super exciting, so let's kind of build upon that and show you what we can actually do with this. So So I've got another folder here called webinar demo, and you can see I've got another main.tf file. I'm going to take the terminal window away here, using the same provider, and I've commented a few sections in here. So the first thing you'll notice, where I've got my resource group, I haven't declared the name specifically here in the location. I've decided I want to offer these up as variables instead. So you can see some additional files that are in this folder. Again, I've got a variables.tf file. So here I've got variables. I've got one called app name. I've got a variable for network environment. I've got a variable for location. And this is just telling Terraform, hey, I've created, these are the variables I want to be able to pass in to my main Terraform file. Then I've got this .tf vars file, and this is the specific variables I've decided to pass in. So I could have Terraform prompt me for them, or I could just simply, pass them in, by putting them in a file that, that I've set them as the values I want. So in my case, we should see this name be ahd-demo, network environment prod, and we're actually going to deploy these in EastUS. So if I go back to main.tf now, you can see that resource group, and you can see it refers to that app name and that location. So that's where it's going to get those details from. Then we've added some additional pieces. So let's start by building out our network. And you can see, again, I've got a resource, Azure Virtual Network, and I'm starting off with an address space of 10.0.0/16. That's going to be for my VNet itself. Then I declare my subnets. And one point to note is the order of these doesn't matter. Terraform will actually figure out, what the right order is. I could flip these. I don't have to worry specifically about dependencies there. Terraform will map those out. Then I've got my main subnet that I want to deploy inside of that VNet, and you can see there it references that virtual network that we've created above. And then same here, you can see for the network interface, in Azure you create your network interfaces, your NICs, before you attach them to your virtual machine. So scrolling down, that's kind of the network, and you'll see how we break that out a little bit later on as well. Then I can decide, okay, I want a virtual machine. Again, I'm using the Azure RM_virtual machine. This is my Terraform name for it that I can refer to it in the code. And then I've got my name here, and you can see again, it's taken that app name variable as well. And then I've got things like my VM size and count. Count allows me, if I wanted to instantiate more than one instance of this, I could choose to do that as well. And that's why you see in our name section at the top here, you can add the count index to it as well. So if I decide I want 2 VMs and I want to name the same thing, we'll just add a number, at the end of that. And so with that, if I scroll down, you can see there's other things here like the image reference. That's the Azure Marketplace image that I'm actually trying to provision from. Some things around storage, the OS profile, and then some tags as well on that virtual machine. So all of this basically is the code for deploying now just the network and a single virtual machine. So if I go over to that folder and do the same thing, I can do a Terraform. I'll just show you the files in there. Hide this. Oh, that's showing up. Okay, there we go. That makes it easier for you. Terraform plan. And now you'll see it's going to give me a much